Welcome to At Home and Abroad with Harrison Walker. Join us each week as we follow our curiosity, diving deep into the familiar and the foreign. Reach beyond your front door as we uncover new perspectives, explore intriguing ideas, and have real conversations with the best guests. Ready for something different? Let's get started.
It could be argued that no one has done more for trees than farmer-turned-environmental activist Jadav Payeng. Payeng is also known as the Forest Man of India. He was dubbed as such after independently planting over 550 hectares of trees on the Mulai Reservation on Majuli Island in the Brahmaputra River. Payeng's efforts are particularly important because this area consistently experiences typhoons and flooding, and as a result, the soil of the riverbanks experience severe erosion. Decades ago, in an attempt to keep the island from further erosion and possible future destruction, a reforestation plan was proposed by the Assam Forestry Division of Golaghat District. Unfortunately, 3 years after this plan was initiated, these efforts came to an end, but Payeng continued to plant. Today, Payeng's legacy is larger than Central Park, hosting many thousands of trees. Payeng's forest has not only helped with the issues of erosion, it has become a refuge for many animals, including Bengal tigers and Indian rhinos, as well as many species of birds, reptiles, and monkeys. In fact, a herd of around 100 elephants regularly visits the forest every year, and generally, they stay around for months. They've given birth to 10 calves there in recent years. Payeng has also inspired a children's book entitled Jadav and the Tree Place, about a tree planter who loves, as the book calls it, tree places.
Clearly, Jadav Payeng is a very giving human being.
He certainly seems to be.
Had he always felt tree planting was something that he needed to be involved in?
His drive to reforest this island began as a teenager when he came across some snakes who had died due to the extreme heat. There was no shade for them to retreat to. So he started planting and didn't stop for over 40 years.
Talk about taking things into your own hands.
I know, right? What a guy. If we could all make such a difference, what a different world we would live in.
Definitely.
And in the simple act of planting trees, the forest attracted wildlife, insects, birds, and improved the condition of the soil, recreating a positive, forward-moving ecosystem there.
Incredible.
Trees are not only beautiful, but they're also anchors in the healthy operation of all the systems of our planet.
Unless they're flowering like the Japanese cherry blossom, I think they go mostly unnoticed.
Yeah, you might be right. And this is referred to as plant blindness. 10 Tree, an ecologically responsible clothing organization, posted on its blog that trees are the often underappreciated hard workers of the plant world. They clean the air, help keep our cities and planet cool, and are just pleasant to be around.
Well, forests are also carbon sinks, releasing oxygen, and trees also help to filter our drinking water. Not to mention, trees provide homes for living creatures.
Right. Did you know that one tree can provide a habitat to hundreds of species of insects, mammals, plants, fungi, and moss?
That's so amazing.
I know. And beyond all that, I've been absolutely captivated by the relatively recent understanding that trees communicate. Dr. Suzanne Simard, a forest ecology professor from the University of British Columbia and author of the book Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest, says that trees do in fact communicate via underground fungal networks. The fungi are called mycorrhizae, and they are situated on the tree roots.
Yes, this communication network has been compared to the workings of the brain and has been called the Wood Wide Web.
Oh my God, I love that. Dr. Simard says that there is often an older tree too, referred to as a mother tree or a hub tree, which can share nutrients with younger saplings.
That is so amazing. Trees raising their young.
Right. She says that the seedlings will link into the network of the old trees and benefit from that huge uptake resource capacity. And the old trees would also pass a little bit of carbon and nutrients and water to the little seedlings at crucial times in their lives that actually help them survive.
This is so cool. It takes a village, right? Even among the trees.
Right. Also, trees can release chemicals in order to warn other trees of impending danger. German forester Peter Wohlleben outlines this in his best-selling book, The Hidden Life of Trees.
Oh, I know that book.
Yeah, it was a bestseller. It was super, super popular when it came out. Some have challenged the findings, though, wanting to expand the sample forest studied. But as Dr. Simard told the CBC, more research is always needed, especially in ecosystems as complex as forests. We need to work together as teams to really solve these complex problems, which makes sense.
It does, especially because there are roughly 422 trees for every person in this world. Even knowing what we know, I have a feeling that we've severely underestimated these very complex yet mysterious gifts of nature.
Yeah, well, Walker, we're lucky to be speaking today to someone who can give us a little more insight into trees, Dr. Peter M. Brown. Dr. Brown founded Rocky Mountain Tree Ring Research, a nonprofit research organization, in 1997. His research involves use of tree ring and other data to reconstruct fire, forest, and climate histories, and the application of such data to current issues in forest and fire management and restoration ecology. He is also past president of the Tree Ring Society, an international organization of tree ring scientists with members from over 40 countries. Welcome to At Home and Abroad, Dr. Brown.
Well, thank you, Heather. Pleasure to be here.
We're very excited to talk to you today. Unfortunately, we don't have Walker with us because she's suffered some catastrophic technological issues, but it's just the two of us.
Everybody on Zoom knows those issues. So
that is the truth. So what first drew you to the study of dendrochronology or the study of tree rings?
Well, I mean, just to start off, everybody knows, of course, you can count the number of rings to find the age of a tree. But really, that's just sort of the basic. I always used to tell everybody, well, my second grader son could count tree rings. So I actually got interested because of archaeological applications. I grew up in northern Arizona on the Navajo Indian Reservation, and my family was very much into archaeology at the time. And there was a fellow who was dating the cliff dwellings, several cliff dwellings in northern Arizona using the tree rings. And I was 7 years old, and I was completely fascinated by the fact that he could find the ages of these ruins from the tree rings. Mm-hmm. And the idea, of course, is that since climate controls the growth of the trees, then they show variations through time, of course. If the tree's responding to drought, then it's drying your small ring, et cetera. And the idea is, of course, that we can start with living trees, build up chronologies of these ringlets going back in time, these ring patterns going back in time. And then when we go to something like an archaeological site where there's a timber that somebody cut down to use in the construction of their village, then we can go and take usually about a 5 to 10 millimeter, 20 millimeter diameter core out of the log, and then get the tree ring pattern on that, and then try and match it up with the living tree chronology.
Okay.
And the living tree chronology is absolutely dated. We start with living trees, so we work our way backwards. As I tell everybody, to be a good dendrochronologist, you really just have to know how to count backwards from 10. We put a dot on every decade, so that allows us to keep track of exactly where we are on the wood. But anyway, the archaeologist, of course, is interested in the cutting date, the death date of the tree, when somebody cut the tree down. So anyway, as a second grader growing up in northern Arizona, I was completely fascinated that you could use the tree rings to do that, to find the ages of these ruins.
That is amazing. Not only the fact that you can date these cliff dwellings with tree rings, but the fact that you grew up in such an archaeologically rich environment. You're very, very lucky human being. And I'm not surprised that it was so inspiring to you. I didn't realize that the core samples were so tiny.
Yeah, and from living trees, and this is another question, is what we can do is we use what's called an increment borer. It's a special tool. It's a hollow drill, basically. And that cuts about a 4 to 5 millimeter diameter core.
Okay.
But we can go up to a living tree, sample that. The drill goes all the way into the center of the tree. So then we can get a record of the rings from that tree without having to cut it down, which is a big question. And then the next question a lot of people asked is that hurt the tree. The trees usually they'll have resin. They can fill in that hole pretty quickly afterwards. So kind of equate it to like a woodpecker banging on the side of a tree. They'll leave a little hole, but it really doesn't hurt the tree.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. Anything that's boring into the tree tends to heal its wounds just as we do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you intimated that tree rings can tell us so much more than just the age of a tree. You mentioned drought. What are the other kinds of things that tree rings can tell us?
Yeah, so again, the archaeological application has actually been a big one around the world, in particular. Again, finding the ages of any type of historic structure or building that has wood in it, and then you of course have to have a living tree ring chronology from nearby locations that you can match that with. The other thing, of course, is since again climate is controlling the growth of the trees, a big application of tree ring research has been to reconstruct past climate. The idea, of course, being that we only have weather records going back around the world, maybe 100, 200, 150 years at most, reliable weather records. But we have trees growing, right up on the mountain, right outside of town, that are 500 to even older, 500 years old to older. So we can use the relationships we see, the statistical relationships between climate and growth. So for example, some trees, say growing at upper tree line or upper latitudes, they're responding much more to temperature. The warmer the summer, the bigger the rain. Whereas trees growing down at lower elevations are responding more to drought, so soil moisture. So we can use these relationships then to reconstruct temperature, drought, stream flow. People have used them for quite a bit.
Oh.
Anyway, the dendroclimate, dendro meaning tree, chronology, chrono is time, so study of time from trees basically. But then the dendroclimatology is looking at climate from tree rings.
Yeah, over a long period of time, depending on the age of the trees that you're looking at.
The longest tree ring chronologies around the world are on the order of thousands of years old. And so people, for example, have really looked at climate over the past, in general, about 2,000 years. And we've got just decent chronologies that people can use to particularly look at, one of the big applications of probably lots of folks are familiar with the hockey stick reconstruction of temperature. It was a few years ago showing that, the temperature's been fairly flat, the stick of the hockey stick, and then the curve at the very end where we've been pumping CO2 into the atmosphere. That's a number of different proxy data, they're called. So proxy meaning that the feature of interest, in this case temperature, is recorded in some sort of natural archive. So that's ice core data, tree ring data, sediment data, and other of these natural archives. But people have put all those together again to come up with this temperature reconstruction that suggests that, yes, we're in an unusual period of time in terms of climate.
That's an important message to get out there, that it's not just tracking temperature like we would today with a thermometer, but we're actually looking at all of these different indices in the natural environment that indicate that climate change is in fact occurring.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very, very valuable.
I mean, and you couple that then, of course, with the understanding of the physics and the chemistry of how CO2 and other trace gases work in the atmosphere in terms of radiation and so on. So obviously, it's another piece of the puzzle for certainly.
Yeah, for sure. So this historical tree ring data, how can it inform future forest management practices, particularly as we face climate change and also the ever-increasing threat of forest fires in many regions of the world?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Another big application of dendrochronology in recent years in particular. One of the nice things about trees is that as an archive, they don't move. They're always in the same place throughout their entire life.
Right.
So whatever, you've got a 500-year-old tree growing out there in the forest and all the climate and other environmental conditions that have ever affected that tree can potentially be recorded in tree rings.
Right.
So one of the things we find is what are called fire scars. Fire can kill a tree by killing all of the growing tissue around the circumference of the tree, girdling the tree, or killing enough of the canopy of the tree, a crown fire, that the tree dies. But what these fire scars are, where a more low-intensity fire has injured the tree, killed a portion of that growing tissue, the cambium, but not killed the tree entirely. So the tree continues to grow, and we find these fire scars in many cases in some of the forests that we deal with. These fairly dry, grass-dominated forest around the world, a sequence of these fire scars, in some cases 20, 30 fire scars recorded on a single tree.
Wow.
The problem is that, well, okay, we see these fire scar records up until, for example, here in the Western U.S., we have hundreds of these sites. And in almost all cases, we see very frequent fire up until the late 1800s. Late 1800s comes along, and what goes on then is, first of all, it's grazing. These are mainly grass-fueled fires in the past, with the Native American populations being removed from their traditional areas, European settlement taking place, bringing in sheep and cattle grazing. That tends to reduce the fine fuels, the grass fuels. And so fires may still be getting started, either by humans or by lightning, but not being able to spread.
Right.
Later in the 20th century, of course, particularly here in the U.S., but in Canada and other places around the world, we start getting active fire suppression, which had good purposes, of course, to protect timber resources and protect villages and towns and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that changes that fuel structure and the entire structure of the forest quite considerably. In the past, what we were finding is that fires are burning every 10, 15, 20 years on average, and that tended to kill little trees, baby trees.
Right.
If you stop those fires, now all of a sudden all of those seedlings and saplings can go up and be so we increase the density of some of these forests, landscape coverage. Now, when a fire gets started, of course, and particularly with climate change and warming and drying conditions around much of the world, what's going on is now we've got extra fuel coupled with warming conditions, and all of a sudden, we've got these big destructive fires. And of course, the other issue, of course, is that we've got much more human infrastructure built up, subdivisions and.
Yeah, so there's a greater impact. They're much more difficult to manage, and there's also potential greater impact on the human environment as well as the natural.
Analogous to, with increased hurricane activity and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That there's, just a lot more people in our stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we can look at those fire scars on trees from a historical perspective and really see and understand why we are experiencing the forest fires that we are today, because they truly are quite dramatic. The loss of the natural world and human life.
Oh, yeah. The message that I give to public groups all the time whenever I speak to them is, for most of our particularly here in Western North America, our Western dry ecosystems, fire is pretty much inevitable. It's going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, this is where our information, our data has been able to help inform forest management efforts. So the focus right now on both thinning forests, removing some of that fuel, as well as then reintroducing prescribed fires, controlled.
Right, controlled fires, right.
Yeah, instead of fire occurring now under the midsummer drought when it hasn't rained for 6 months or something like that, and it's 110 outside, to be able to actually have a little bit more of a control on when that fire is burning, how much effort and ecological impact it's having for us.
And it can actually have a beneficial ecological impact. These are naturally occurring circumstances, so that it can have a good impact for the soil, I understand, as well as thinning that canopy. So you collect tree ring data from both living and non-living trees. Do you collect it from trees that have fallen, or is it just more from an archaeological perspective, timbers that you would find in a building?
Well, for example, on our fire history studies that we do looking for these fire scar dates, to be honest, quite often there's stumps.
Oh.
There has been a lot of timber use over the years. Mm-hmm. And one thing is that, with using our cross-dating techniques, we don't have to know, again, it's like the archaeological timbers, we don't have to know when the tree was cut or anything like that.
Right.
We have our increment cores from the living trees going back in time, and then we can match the patterns up that we see on our stumps. so we can get the exact dates of when those fires burned in the past.
That's really interesting. And also that would give you a little bit of information about the human activity in that area at that time.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting observation because, one of the questions right now is a lot of impacts of Native American population. So you kind of need three things for the fire to occur. You need the fuel, you need that fuel to dry out, but then you need an ignition source. And in many cases, we know it's probably lightning. There's, natural lightning as an ignition source. But then in many cases, there were humans out there setting fires on the landscape, both accidentally and on purpose for hunting purposes and other things like that. And in some cases, there's some good evidence that indigenous populations, First Nation populations, were using fire as a management tool, to be able to collect huckleberries, keep the brush down that they could hunt better, and so on and so on. So
that's fascinating. It can tell us so much. So the Rocky Mountain Tree Ring Research hosts a database of ancient trees, dubbed the Old List. I feel like I should be on that list, Dr. Brown. Where can we find the oldest trees in the world, and what can they tell us about the past?
That's a great question because, old trees are where you find them, basically. But
right.
It's interesting, and this is one problem, is it doesn't work in humans, but we always use this longevity under adversity. There was actually a really interesting paper years ago in the 50s that came up with that title. It was by this guy, Ed Shulman, who actually found the bristlecone pines, which are the oldest species that are known in the world. And the idea is that basically the oldest trees, both in terms of the oldest species, but the oldest individuals of any one type of tree, tend to be in most adverse condition.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You always see, like a big tree growing down along a creek or something like that. Well, that tree's just fat and happy. It's
right.
had all the water it's ever wanted. It's in the perfect environment. So, we core one of those trees and we find, the rings are nice and big and fat and they don't vary very much and so on. Whereas if we go right next door up on the slope, with a big rocky slope, and there's a little soil development and there's a scraggly old tree living up there, that's where the oldest trees are because, the tree's just growing very slowly. It doesn't get a lot of moisture every year. It tends to be what we call very sensitive to climate.
Right.
If it only has the soil moisture that falls on that particular spot for the year. So those are the trees we tend to look for. Also, the idea is that, and this has kind of come up recently in the literature quite a bit, is do trees die? How do trees die? Because the idea is that trees are being modular organisms, plants being modular organisms in general. Trees are putting on new wood and new bark and new leaves, even new sex organs every year.
Right.
And, it's not like an animal where once we're born, all our parts are there and they just start to wear out through time.
Yeah.
They're putting on new stuff. So I've always kind of been under my thing is that trees don't die, they're killed by something. Fire comes along, lightning, drought, us, cutting them
definitely
down.
Us,
bark beetles, things like that. And one of the things about this longevity under adversity is typically, these trees growing up in these scraggly little spots in the rocks and stuff like that, they are... they're widely spaced. There's not much fuel for fire to burn. Mm-hmm. They're not very good timber trees. No one came along and cut them down. Mm-hmm. So they haven't been killed yet.
Wow, that's so amazing. Because I was going to ask you, why would those trees up on the slope in that hard scrabble soil be the ones that live the longest? But that's it. They're out of the way of naturally occurring circumstances that would
anything
take them
that's going to harm them.
Yeah.
So, or at least less possibility. So generally the older trees that people find, like in the Himalayas, there's there's a lot of Chinese scientists working in dendrochronology right now. And they've been finding just amazingly old trees up at tree line in the really rocky, isolated little spots and little stands of trees and stuff.
So what is old? What do you consider an old tree?
Well, Typically, that's a good question. One of the things that we've, for example, right now, there's a new old growth rule that President Biden just got implemented recently.
Okay.
And it really depends upon the species and it depends upon the location, but about 150 years is considered to be old.
Okay.
Growth.
Okay.
But for us, an old tree is probably over 1,000.
Wow.
1,000
I just
years.
can't imagine 1,000 years. There's
not
remarkable.
that many species out there that are over 1,000 years old. So.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. So it speaks to the possibilities that trees hold within them. So have you ever been surprised by the data you've uncovered when studying a specific set of trees or tree data?
No, all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Right now, actually, one of the things that I'm doing a lot of is working with landowners to grow trees for carbon storage.
Okay.
And this is one of the strategies for mitigating climate change is that as trees grow, obviously, they're taking carbon dioxide out of the air. About 50% of the biomass of a tree is carbon.
Mm-hmm.
Taken as from CO2, carbon dioxide. And so, people are, every time you hear Amazon or some of these other big companies are going carbon neutral, part of it is that they're putting money into things like solar plants and wind plants and wind farms, but also paying landowners, forest landowners to keep their trees on the property. So what we do is provide ages for the trees. And one of the things that's surprising me lately is just how many young trees are out there on the landscape. We've worked
really
all over. In fact, several of the sites that we've worked in are in Canada, all in North America.
Mm-hmm.
It just is, it's kind of interesting to find a tree that goes back into the 1800s in some of these inventories that we've been working on.
And from what you've been saying, that seems like it wouldn't be the natural way of things. You would actually be typically more likely to run into older trees.
That's what I mean. And again, it's sort of the background of more of the scientific research that we've been doing, where we're looking for old trees specifically.
Mm-hmm.
We've been able to find them. These are just any old landowner, that wants to monetize growing trees on their properties.
Mm-hmm.
So the inventory crews go out and just randomly sample trees.
Yeah.
And find that vast majority of them started up in the 20th century.
Wow. Well, I wonder if that was because there was such a great harvest of them back when the Europeans settled the land.
Yeah, that's the big question, I think, in terms of how much of this landscape was forested prior to, say, the late 1800s or even the late 1700s, when we started cutting trees down and stuff like that.
Yeah,
setting fires and things like that.
Well, there's so much you can learn. I mean, it's really endless, and it's absolutely fascinating because I don't think many people, we walk by them every day, and many of us enjoy them every day, but you don't think about that rich resource that trees really represent. So we're very grateful to you and people like you who can really bring that to light.
Yeah, everybody, you always walk by trees and you look at these really nice big trees and old trees and you wonder how old they are. And there's a way of finding out.
There's a way of finding out. And if you want to find out more, you can go to Rocky Mountain Tree Ring Research at www.rmtrr.org, where you'll find a plethora of information and links that will lead you down that rabbit hole of dendrochronology. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Certainly, Heather. Thank you.
I've always loved trees, but this conversation with Dr. Brown has even deepened my respect for them, as well as my curiosity.
Oh, that makes two of us. The more I learn about trees, the more I absolutely want to learn.
So, do you have a specific tree that you feel a deep connection with, or a species that you find really interesting?
Well, two homes I've lived in have had huge maple trees on the property, the home I grew up in and our current family home. And I don't know if I purposely chose this house that I've raised our children in because of the big, beautiful maple on the lawn, But what I do know is that these trees have lent a sense of comfort and a feeling of protection.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've got a big old maple too. She's about 100 years old now because she was planted when the house was built. I sometimes think about what she's witnessed as the decades have rolled by, and I'm pretty sure she's not very impressed with the dust and noise of construction these days.
Yeah, I would bet you're right. There are also two species of trees which I'm a bit obsessed with, but aren't native to Canada.
Cool. What are they?
Well, one is a banyan tree. I remember the first time I saw one at Cypress Gardens in Florida. I have to say I stopped dead in my tracks. They are majestic. I have been obsessed with them ever since.
Yeah.
The other is a tree which I've never seen in person but would love to. It is the Eucalyptus deglupta, also known as the rainbow eucalyptus or rainbow gum.
That's the tree species with the really colorful trunk, right?
It is. It's a pretty tall tree as well, growing roughly 197 to 246 feet tall. When the bark sheds off in strips, the underneath is pink and red and orange, gray, and brown. You see it often on social media.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. So where can that tree be found?
Well, Indonesia and the Philippines, among other countries. What about you?
I'm kind of partial to willow trees. They are just so graceful and they seem so gentle, when the sun is shining through their leaves. But they can also be a little terrifying in a storm, not only because they're prone to losing limbs and falling down.
Like the Whomping Willow in Harry Potter.
Right, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Welsh giant hand of Vernwyt. It isn't a living tree anymore, but rather it is a sculpture carved from what was once the tallest tree in the UK. The 50-foot tall piece was sculpted by environmental artist Simon O'Rourke from Northern Wales.
It really is something to behold. So what's the story behind it? I've always wondered.
Yeah, well, the artist chose to create an arm with a hand outstretched, as he said it was the tree's last attempt to reach for the sky.
So it was a damaged tree, right, Harris?
Yeah, it was. It actually stretches right into the tree canopy, but it's not nearly as tall as the tallest tree, is it?
Oh, not even close. Apparently the tallest tree is 379.1 feet tall.
Holy smokes.
It's a coastal redwood called Hyperion and is located in Redwood National Park in Northern California. Apparently it's the tallest living tree on the planet.
Well, those redwoods are gigantic. But they aren't the oldest trees, as we know from chatting with Dr. Brown today.
Definitely not. The oldest tree in the world is thought to be a 4,855-year-old tree by the name of Methuselah. But fairly recently, another tree nearby was thought to be even older.
Even older? Where is that?
Well, they're located somewhere in Inyo National Forest in Northern California.
Somewhere? That's awfully mysterious, Walker.
It is. It is in an undisclosed location to protect them.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, and there are no photos, so who knows what they look like?
Well, someone's got to know. Who would have thought that the world of dendrology would be so intriguing?
Exactly. Though our forests face the threat of destruction from forest fires, clear cutting, and other environmental issues often triggered by climate change, some trees are well suited to combating these pressures.
Right, like mangrove trees. Mangroves are those trees that grow in salty tropical soil that lack oxygen. You can see them in many coastal marine environments, but they're just such important ecosystems. They act as fish nurseries, as well as serve as natural defenses from storm surges and rising sea levels.
Wow, they clearly need our protection.
For sure they do. And in the case of forest fires, many species of pine are fire resistant and can thrive and revive even after a fire rips through, like Dr. Brown mentioned. They have thicker bark, protecting the inner living tissues inside the trunk that transport water and nutrients. And aspens, too, are pivotal in forest fires. They have a high water content, and due to that fact, the area underneath them remains cooler. So they actually create natural fire breaks in forests.
This is absolutely fascinating.
It really is. According to One Tree Planted, when firefighters see an aspen break, they locate themselves nearby to put out the fire. This is the reason that they're planting aspen right now in British Columbia. Of course, trees do adapt to other aspects of their environments too. Take the kapok tree. These massive rainforest trees have developed trunks of sharp thorns that offer protection from predators, as well as shallow, broad root systems that help them withstand high winds and storms. The Aztec, Maya, and other pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures considered this tree sacred, a symbol of the link between heaven, earth, and the world that was believed to exist below.
Neat. So trees have always been interesting, even on a spiritual level. It's no wonder. they seem to hold so many secrets. Like you said before, these big old giants have seen so much, sometimes decades worth.
Yeah, or in the case of Methuselah, millennia.
Exactly. And so they're woven into the fabric of human existence. Take the hazelnut tree, for example. It's associated with knowledge and wisdom. This association likely grew out of a Celtic story in which 9 hazelnut trees grew around a sacred pool. When the nuts fell off the tree and fell in the water, they were eaten by salmon who acquired knowledge and wisdom. Coincidentally, salmon just happens to be good for our brains.
Oh, Walker, you connected the dots on that one. Now, I'm going to get a little witchy on you with the rowan tree. This tree is native to the UK and is said to be magical, offering protection from witchcraft and enchantment. They're also known as fairy trees, as it's thought that these little otherworldly creatures lived there among the white blossoms. And for this reason, humans would carry the branches, tie them to their cattle, or even sew them into the lining of their clothing.
I think it's still revered today among pagans as well, who make divinatory runes from their wood of the rowan tree.
Yeah, you got that right. Apparently, Druids even used the bark and berries to dye garments, too. I'm not sure if they do that, though, today. So any Druids out there, let us know. There are so many trees that are believed to have magical attributes, too. The yew, hawthorn, oak. Have you ever seen the juniper trees in Sedona?
No, I'm not even sure I've heard of them.
Well, I've never been to Sedona, so this is on my go-to list, but I haven't seen them either. Sedona is a bit of a magical hotspot with like crazy energy. It's this energy that is believed to twist the trunks of the juniper trees.
Pardon?
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, close to 3 million people go to Sedona annually to experience that vortex energy.
Okay, maybe I've been missing out on something all these years. Clearly.
Sounds like it. Time for a road trip, Walker. Supposedly, if you spot a twisty juniper, you might be able to avail yourself of the healing energy. But of course, not everybody's a believer.
So are you a believer, Harris?
Well, my motto is, I don't know what I don't know, Walker. But I'm not surprised that people believe that trees hold some magical properties. Take the Socotra dragon tree or the dragon blood tree of Yemen.
Oh yeah, these are really something.
Yeah, they are. They have branches that stretch out and up in the shape of an umbrella, and crazily, their resin runs red, hence the name.
So there must be some stories that are associated with this tree.
Yeah, for sure. The legend goes that the tree sprouted when the drops of an injured dragon fell after a tussle with an elephant. The Socotra dragon tree's future is threatened, though, and if lost, not only would we lose an iconic tree, but so many species depend on that tree for their survival. 92, in fact.
Wow. We haven't really much valued trees as species ourselves, have we, Harris? Except maybe to meet our own needs of shelter, food, and warmth. They deserve more respect.
Yeah, they do. But we do pay homage to them in our art and religious symbolism.
You're right, like the Tree of Life.
Exactly. The Tree of Life is featured in most faiths under one pretense or another. And so it's a fairly common image in art over time. Most often it represents themes of fertility or immortality, like the cycle of life kind of thing.
Like the Bodhi tree. Mm-hmm. This is the sacred fig, Ficus religiosa, under which the Buddha sat when he attained enlightenment, otherwise known as Bodhi, at Bodh Gaya in Bihar, India.
I would love to visit that tree, though I think it's a descendant of the original tree now. It's a site of great pilgrimage, particularly for Buddhists.
Yes, the original was planted in 288 BC and therefore is thought to be the oldest tree intentionally planted by humans.
Wow, that's so cool. It's a place of deep contemplation and meditation. Of course, to protect the tree, you can't touch it, remove leaves, or even tie cloth or string to it. It's not a tree you can hug, however much you might want to.
Good to know. I would be tempted.
It's so important that we take steps to protect trees and not just the magical or meaningful ones.
Like the original tree huggers, the members of the Bishnoid branch of Hinduism.
Right. 294 men and 69 women died in 1730, almost 300 years ago, while protecting local trees that were going to be felled for building material to construct a palace. Though these people died, there was a royal decree that followed that disallowed trees to be cut down in the villages.
Remarkable.
It's thought that this was the origin story for the Chipko movement, meaning to cling in Hindi, which started in the 1970s. The Chipko movement is a non-violent resistance aiming to protect India's forests. The movement began in the 70s, as I said, in response to the increasing destruction of forests for commerce and industry.
Now, I've heard of this movement. It was largely started by women in response to losing their livelihood as forests were being felled.
Yeah, exactly. But as we said, our reliance on trees does extend past survival or livelihood. Some of us revere trees and have a strong spiritual connection, like Dr. Nalini Nadkarni. She's a canopy biologist from the United States and actually conducts religious sermons on trees. She's known as the Queen of the Forest Canopy.
What a beautiful title.
I know. I kind of like to have that title. She delivers sermons specifically on trees and spirituality. In an interview for CBC's Tapestry, she said, "We look at trees and we can see that they are rooted in the earth, and yet they extend their limbs up towards the sky. Trees are real connectors between earth and sky, between the mundane and the spiritual, in many ways. And so I start with the form of trees, the fact that they physically occupy that space between earth and sky."
Now that harkens back to the sculpture in Wales, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. Perhaps there's some element of that in the popular health practice of forest bathing.
Probably. Japanese doctors even prescribe Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, to their patients, and I think it's starting to happen here in North America too.
Yeah, I think people are catching on.
Apparently, walking among the trees stimulates our senses in a healthy way. And of course, we aren't being distracted by technology. It's peaceful.
So how old is that practice, Walker?
Well, apparently it was only during the 1980s that it's really started catching on.
Well, the 80s were pretty stressful. We needed it back then.
Exactly. Forest bathing has been known to lower levels of stress, encourage better sleep, and have positive effects on our mood. So it's really not surprising that the diminishing green space in urban centers is having a negative effect on urban folk. The University of Waterloo just recently conducted a study that relates to that.
Oh, really?
Yes, they studied the impacts of exposure to nature on adolescents' well-being, specifically anxiety. And as you might guess, the study revealed that forest bathing had a positive influence on young people. They found that being in natural urban spaces lowered levels of anxiety with only 2 or 3 minutes of exposure, as opposed to an increase in anxiety experienced by teens when they were standing in a busy downtown setting.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I know as an adult, I definitely feel stressed out making my way around downtown. Something for our urban planners to consider.
We need to think about it too. According to Dr. Ching Li, author of Forest Bathing, How Trees Can Help You Find Health and Happiness, 93% of our lives are spent inside.
That's insane and totally not good.
Not at all. According to Dr. Ching Li, we are experiencing nature deficit disorder, and this can lead to the diminishing use of the senses, attention difficulties, conditions of obesity, and higher rates of emotional and physical illnesses.
Well, that should really give us pause. We need to get outdoors, people.
We do. You've been to Japan. Did you spend much time walking the forest while you were there?
We did, actually, through the Arishiyama bamboo forest, through the beautiful forest of Shimoda Park, and through the many forested gardens of palaces and temples. It's just a stunning country.
So forest bathing is not hard to do on your own, but you can also hire a guide or even a therapist.
Well, that would take all the stress out of it, wouldn't it, Walker?
Well, you wouldn't want to get stressed by trying to find a forest to de-stress, would you?
No, you would not.
The healing properties of forests has not gone unnoticed by New Yorkers either. Just this month, hundreds of volunteers gathered on Roosevelt Island, which is located in the East River off the coast of Manhattan, to plant the Manhattan Healing Forest, New York City's first tiny forest. This land was once occupied by a penitentiary, a mental asylum, and even a smallpox hospital. According to its creators at the Suji Project, a foundation dedicated to the installation of similar environments in urban areas, the tiny 2,700 square foot patch of land will, with its diverse array of flora and fauna, serve as a miniature lung for Manhattan, providing habitat for migratory birds, butterflies, and a variety of urban wildlife.
How wonderful. But whoa, does that land have quite a history? How did they go about reclaiming it for this little forest?
Well, Akira Miyawaki, a Japanese botanist and ecologist, developed the idea of the tiny forest, which the aim is said to promote the development of dense natural growth leading to biodiversity. The New York Times reported that these Miyawaki-style forests become self-sufficient within 3 years and can achieve maturity within a few decades, providing habitat for insects and wildlife, as well as absorbing carbon and cleaning the air.
Let's hope that this tiny little forest serves as a model for many others.
I think Shakespeare would agree, Harris. After all, he said, "One touch of nature makes the whole world kin."
Thank you for joining us at Home and Abroad with your host, Harrison Walker. If you enjoyed this episode, you would be a real gem if you would rate and review our show. It helps us to grow and expand our reach. You can also subscribe to follow us each week as we continue the conversation. Find us on Instagram at Harrison Walker or visit us at www.harrisonwalker.com. We have great merch, just saying. And of course, we would love to hear from you.